All right, let's go to slide 2. So the context in Australia is we've been working in this space for, I don't know, probably 30 years or more, and we've been agitating with the government to fund these kinds of activity more and more strategically. The problem is that every time you have a change of government, they have a restructure of departments, they have to create new funding programs to look like they're being strategic. Everything gets new acronyms, new names, and so on. So you'll find that if you look at any of the Australian documentation, that acronym overload is very prevalent there. In Australia, we refer to it as eResearch, which is equivalent to the UK eScience and the US cyber infrastructure. I and several of my colleagues pushed quite strongly for eResearch because we found, certainly in the UK, that groups like the humanities, arts and social sciences sector really felt left out. They kind of felt it was all about the big science, the big physical sciences. At a philosophical level, eResearch has been described as many things, and people struggle to kind of agree about it, but broadly speaking, what I tend to use it is the concept of IT that enhances research. It makes it more efficient, more effective, greater throughput, and at the end of the day, a researcher is measured by their publications. If anything that allows them to publish more quickly makes them happier. The other part is that it enables research. It enables things to happen that you couldn't do before. Before the web, getting access to data, finding other collaborators, working together in real time was a real struggle. And now we have the ability to pretty much, if you can imagine it, you can build it. Next slide, please. Australia is a reasonably small country, population-wise, and certainly a very small country if you count the number of universities. I'm stunned by the fact that the US has about a bit over 10 times our population and over 100 times the number of universities. However, in Australia, almost all of our universities are public. I think we have maybe 2 private universities here. In terms of our population distribution, we're roughly equivalent to continental US, but much more urbanised. We really only have about 3, maybe 4 cities that are over 1 million people, and they are well and truly over 1 million. And then there's a fairly thin smear across the rest of the country, and most of it is around the eastern seaboard. So a little bit like the Canadian experience, but even more urbanised than that. Our federal government throws around $1 trillion every year to try and make everybody happy. We have a structure, and this is quite important, where we have very strong states and territories. In a way, the Australian Federation is a group of states that have kind of agreed to cede some powers to create a federal structure, but they don't forget the fact that they were all little independent countries before that. And that comes back to bite in a few places, interestingly. We have roughly, just in the core competitive research grants programs, roughly $2 billion a year gets given to researchers. That's not the entire research and development budget in Australia. That's probably quite a bit larger than that. But just in the core, what is given to the university research community to do their research on a yearly basis. At the end of the day, the reality is that we're a remote little country with not a lot of money, although I guess by per capita we're not too badly off, which means that in the culture there's a fairly strong sense of pragmatism. You have to think reasonably clever about how you implement various initiatives, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Next slide, please. So where we started from is pretty common across the globe. A very large number of research support grant schemes, generally very competitive grant schemes, tend to be small to medium scale, generally well below the $1 million mark, up to $1 million, maybe a little bit over, but that's roughly about as far as they go, and typically short term. It was very rare to get a funding program that went for more than a couple of years. There were some university industry collaboration programs that went out to 7 years and got funded to a few tens, but they're very much in the minority, very small number of those programs. That kind of funding environment maximises flexibility and innovation. You put the money right at the coalface, and you allow people to be very flexible, to innovate and everything. However, you maximise the risk by doing so. And it's just like inside a university, the argument about central IT versus faculty IT. Putting the money out of the edges puts it where the people who know what the priorities are can spend it on. The problem is that the people that are doing the spending then may not think all that strategically. They don't tend to think necessarily in a very professional and high-quality, long-term strategic kind of sense. They certainly don't tend to think about standards and interoperability and all those kinds of areas. And it basically meant that if you actually wanted to build something quite strategic, you spend a lot of time lobbying the government to fund it through yet another enthusiastic initiative when we happen to have a really good budget year. And if you were lucky, you got the money, but it was a one-off. And basically, you ended up getting a huge pile of money to build that supercomputer, but not the money to keep it going and to refresh it and to put software on it and so on. So it's not, not an ideal kind of environment.
Marcus?
Yeah.
The question, just somebody made a comment. Were you talking about Australia or Canada? So it's very, very, very similar here.
I can believe it.
Situation.
All right, so let's go to the next slide. And I think this is where it starts to get a bit different. So along came our first acronym, NCRIS, the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy, and collaborative is a strong element there. The idea is to look at what are the things that are common, that are so fundamental to all the research within a discipline that you kind of go, hang on a minute, why are we buying 100 small microscopes? Why aren't we buying 2 or 3 of the world's best microscopes, putting them around the place and sharing them? Because at the end of the day, owning a microscope is not competitive. The research you do with it is the competitive part. And so the government said, actually, this is not a bad idea. Let's take all of these 20-odd little programs that they were running for research infrastructure, put them together into one. So it's not new money, it's rebranded money, but it goes under a new planning structure. The money they set aside for this at the time, this is just before the crash, in fact, was just over $500 million. Sorry if I didn't mention it, but Australian dollars and US dollars are roughly on parity, within about 10%. They put in that money and said, okay, we're going to pick some winners here. They picked what they call capability areas. Australia's always had this planning structure where we talk about the national research priorities or the national strengths, where they say we are very good in these disciplines, and if we fund those more strategically, we will make Australia's competitiveness much, much greater. Yes, we have every discipline known to humanity in the country, but they can't fund all of them in a large-scale strategic way. So they basically identified 15 areas they call capabilities, and they added one for infrastructure, and I'll come back to that one in a moment.